Today is August 10th, 2019. It is 1:15 p.m. This is Luciana Spraker representing the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives. I am interviewing Ernest Green Jr. for the City of Savannah's Frogtown, Yamacraw, and West Broad Street History Roundup Day project. We are conducting this interview at the Georgia State Railroad Museum. Today we will be discussing the history of the West Broad Street area and the surrounding neighborhoods. Thank you for joining me today, Mr. Green.
All right, thank you.
Let's start by having you tell us your full name.
Ernest H. Green Jr.
Okay, and what neighborhood are you here to share with us today?
The neighborhood I'm here to share today is Yamacraw Village, which is my hometown.
Okay.
I refer to it as my hometown, Yamacraw Village.
When were you born?
May 21st, 1941.
And where were you born?
Yamacraw Village.
Okay. Were you actually born at home, or were you born in a specific hospital?
That I don't know for that. I've had one relative tell me that I was born at home, and another relative told me that they thought it was Charity Hospital.
Okay.
So it was either at Charity Hospital or either at home. But I know my next sibling was born at home.
Okay.
She was born upstairs in the real back room. I'll never forget that. They had the midwives, and I remember seeing them preparing the beds and stuff like that. I must have been about 5 years old, because we were 5 years apart.
Were the midwives, did they live in Yamacraw Village?
Some of them did.
Okay.
Most of them was my mother's friends and my grandmother's friends.
Okay. What were your parents' names?
Well, my father's name was Ernest H. Green with the E,
Okay.
and my mother's name was Rainey L. Green without the E.
How do you, okay, well let's start with Rainey. How do you spell Rainey?
Rainey.
Okay. And why does her last name have Green without an E?
Because her family spelled their name without the E. My father's family, because my father, he's from Carolina, back from the outskirts of Beaufort, South Carolina. It's a little small township called Seabrook, South Carolina. And that's where my father's from. And my mother, she's from Macon.
Okay. So Green is her maiden name as well?
Green is her maiden name without the E.
What did your father do to make a living?
Okay, when I was born, my father was in the service. He had the Air Corps. When he was released from the service, they changed the name from Air Corps to Air Force. And my dad went to the service in 1940. And when he got out of the service, it was about 4 years later. And after he got out of the service, he went to Tuskegee Institution there in Tuskegee, Alabama. Well, he went there, I think, on the GI Bill during that time. He stayed there at least 4 years after he got out of the service. Then he came back to Savannah. My daddy, he was a licensed tailor. That was his profession. He was a tailor, professional tailor. And so he worked at several tailor shops on West Broad Street. And eventually he worked at someone downtown, Broad Street, which was the main street for shopping back in the day with Broad Street.
What were the names of some of the businesses on West Broad Street that he worked at? Do you remember?
Yeah, he worked at, there was a tailor shop right next to National Tailors, and he might have worked at National Tailors at one time and S&G at one time. And also on Broad Street, he worked for Allen Barish. It was a men's clothing store.
Okay. And what about your mother? Did she work, or was she a stay-at-home?
My mother was when she was younger, she worked with her mother, and she worked at, and my grandmother, she worked at a judge's parents' house, and also my mother worked it for some real estate brokers, and one of the real estate brokers, particular real estate broker that she worked for, he has an office now downtown. Matter of fact, she was his nanny. And over the years, he would come by and check on her, look after her. And well, offhand, I can't think of his name right offhand. But he used to check on my mother.
So, so you were born in 1941 in Yamacraw. How long did you live in Yamacraw Village?
Well, my first 25 years of my life was in Yamacraw Village. Because I graduated from Beach High class of 1958. And I had several odd jobs downtown Savannah from 58 to 1960. And that's when I became a civil rights activist. I worked under the leadership of Hosey Williams. He was the director of Crusade for Voters. And I also worked under W. Law. He was the president of the NAACP. And I met W. Law when I was a young boy, about 5, 6 years old, because I was born in the house 725 Yamacraw Village, but my grandmother moved about the time I was 5, and my mother put in for her own house, and we was able to get a house at 312 Yamacraw Village. So I was around 5 years old when that happened. And I would see Mr. Law at that time because I stayed right next to the church. I didn't know who he was, I was just a young boy. But as I grew up over the years, I would venture down on Broadway Street and I would see Mr. Law again, but he would be in a uniform. And at that time, I realized that he was a mailman. And I would see him pushing his little mail buggy, and he was taking mail on Broad Street. And I couldn't find out later on that was his district for W. Law. And by the time I graduated from high school and bought my first car, I would still see Mr. Law, because he did a lot of walking in Savannah. He's known for walking in his black history. And I would stop and ask him for a ride. Do he need a ride? And most times he would say no, because he would rather walk. He liked seeing and interacting with the people. But every now and then, he might be in a little hurry, and I would see him, and I would wave to him, and he would let me know he would appreciate the ride. So I would take him to his home, which was over the drive. And I would wait on him, he'd go make some changes and maybe freshen up, and he'd be rushing to the meeting, and I would give him a ride to the meeting. Over the years, I've done that for Mr. Law. And during the demonstrations, I got arrested at downtown. We had a restaurant by the name of Morrison Cafeteria. At that time, in 1960, Morrison was one of the primary eating places for whites to eat, because we were not allowed, blacks were not allowed to eat in there. So I got arrested at Morrison Cafeteria, me and about 15 others. And when we get arrested, sometimes we might be locked up for 5 to 6 hours, 8 hours. But this particular time, we got arrested on a Friday. Come to find out, we didn't get out till Monday because of congestion and things. So it's congested. We thought we'd get out in the next 5 or 6 hours, but we kept staying till Monday. But it was a nice experience, and I got arrested several times, and we got ran out of places. I got ran out of Crest, was doing a sit-in, Woodworth, McClure's, and it was an experience for trying to get people registered to vote, And we do sit-ins at churches, and we did wait-ins. I didn't do the wait-in, but they also had a wait-in at Topic Beach. But I did get arrested at Morrison Cafeteria in Crest.
So I might circle back to talk to you a little bit more about the civil rights stuff, but since we're here to talk about the neighborhoods, I want to go back to that. So you were in Yamacraw pretty much, into your early adulthood. So where were you going to school as you were coming up?
Okay, my first grade school, 1st through 6th, I went to West Broad Street, which was the old Scarborough house that was designated by the owners that they had a stipulation it could only be used for one purpose. That was for educational place for Afro Americans. And I went there from 1st grade through 6th grade. That was from 1946, 47 when I first started in 1st grade. I went through 6th grade. Then I left there and went to College Street School, which is on Henry Street, from 7th to 9th grade. Then I went to Beach High, which is on Hopkins Street, from 10th through 12th, and I graduated the class of 1958 at Beach High.
So tell me about some of your memories of West Broad Street School.
What I remember about West Broad Street School is that it was the main stone building was facing West Broad Street, and in the rear was an annex where they had the 1st grade, 2nd grades, and 3rd grades. They had first floor and the second floor. And right between the annex and the main building was a restroom. One side was for boys and the other side was for girls. And also in the basement at Westboro Street School, that's where they had the cafeteria on one side of the basement. And on the other side of the basement, we had a coal bin because the heat at that time, we had those pot-belly stoves in each classroom. And the teacher would always designate one of the young men to keep the coal bin, coal fire burning up. We had to go to the coal bin and get buckets of, shovel up buckets of coal and bring it back to the classroom and keep the fire going. I was one of those folks who always volunteered to go to the coal bin and help me get out of class, something to do extra. So I would go down to the coal bin and shove up some coal in the buckets and bring them back up, set them by the pot-belly stoves, and when the fire kind of died out, I go throw a few more coals up in there, and that was a lot of fun back then. If I look back at it now, that was a lot of fun back then. That's one thing I like to remember about Westboro Street School. And the other thing, I became a fire patrolman at Westboro Street School, and we would have fire drills and a safety patrolman. And we used to have a gentleman from the police department by the name of Lieutenant Funk, I think his name was.
Funk, yes.
Yeah. Well, I remember Funk, 'cause by me being a fire drill and a safety patrolman, we would have to leave the class early, and we would meet with Lieutenant Funk, and he would tell us a little strategy, and we have the kids to go to a certain area around the school, and it was my job to make sure they got there safely and got back safely and kind of give them directions as a patrolman. And then we would have a big rally outside the yard. Lieutenant Funk was going to give us a pep speech. And we used to do that maybe once every 3 or 4 months, seemed like.
Okay, it's like fire drills.
Fire drill, yeah, we did fire drill. At that time, our principal was Principal Dixon. And Principal Dixon, what was unusual about him, he didn't drive, he didn't have a car. He walked and caught the bus everywhere he go. And at that particular time, he also was the principal of 2 schools, Westboro Street School and Maple Street School. And he was very jovial, a lot of fun. Mr. Dixon was. I had to go to his office a couple of times and got my knuckles hit, but other than that, it was a good experience.
Okay. So in in the Yamacraw Village neighborhood, who were some of the important leaders that, as a growing up, that you looked up to or that inspired you?
Okay, as I was growing up, like I say, I stayed 725. That's how I was born, and I was there till I was about 5. That's when my mother decided to go get her own apartment. But at that time, a gentleman by the name of Milton Hall, he was very popular because he was a motorcycle. I just thought about that. Oh, that's my phone here.
It's not mine.
Oh, okay. It's all right if I take this.
Yeah.
Hey, sweetheart. Look on the back porch. It's in that little bag on the back porch. Right now I'm doing an interview down here at the Yamacraw Center. All right, I'll call you back. I'm doing an interview right now. I'm in the middle of an interview. Okay, well, that's my wife.
Okay.
My sister-in-law from Macon coming down. I was supposed to meet in that band. They all right. Okay, then we had Milton Hall. He was a professional motorcycle racer. He had many trophies, and
What did he race?
motorcycle. He was a motorcycle
Motorcycle.
racer. Yeah,
Okay.
his name was Milton Hall. He was a well-known motorcycle racer, and he had many trophies. And he was also one of the first 9 black police officers.
Oh,
And he was our first black motorcycle police officer because he had his own motorcycle. He drove his own motorcycle. And also he became the owner of one of the largest black cab companies in Savannah by the name of Milton Cab Company. He had a fleet of new cab, I think it was new Chevrolets, and he had one of the biggest, newest cab company for blacks in Savannah at the time. And also, some historical things about Yamacraw. A lot of prominent people lived in Yamacraw back in the day because most of the houses in Savannah during that time was dilapidated, old wooden shacks. So the project was something, but you had inside plumbing, and you had a nice surrounding, and it was a nice building. And the apartment we lived in, we had upstairs, downstairs, and although we didn't have central heat or central air, but we did have convenience that other people didn't have. We had the solar system that gave us hot water when the sun shined, and so there was some convenience that other people, some of my friends who stayed, say, across Bay Street, I would go visit them. They had outside toilets. They had maybe one outside water supply. They didn't have water supply inside. They didn't have electricity inside. So I had all these things. So living in the project versus living outside the project is like living in a mansion, so to speak. The difference in those.
So once you got in there, you didn't want to leave.
There you go. And my father stayed there. We did leave because my mother was ready to leave, because it seemed like everybody that in my block always leave before we did. So that means we was the longest one there, because, like I said, my parents stayed down there for 30 years. And one of the reasons for that, when I look back at it, my father worked it downtown. So he had no incentive to want to leave, because he could walk one block. My daddy had to go but one block to work. My daddy worked on the corner of West Broad and Broad, which is one block from where we stayed. Then when the boss man moved from West Broad and Broad, he moved to West Broad and Bryan. So that made it even closer. So he never had no incentive to leave. So, but my mother said it was about time for us to go. That's when they bought their first home on East 36th Street.
East 36th.
And the house is still there today.
So talk a little bit about the where people work. Besides you talked about your parents, but where other people in the neighborhood work.
Okay, well, I shared the porch at 312 Yamacraw Village. Right next door to me was a gentleman by the name of Frank Freeman. He was a prominent person in Savannah. He was a freelance photographer. He also was a radio personality. He came on 12 o'clock noon every day. WJIV, 12 o'clock noon, Frank Freeman. He was my next door neighbor. And about 2 doors from me, which was to be 12, 15, there was another gentleman surrounded by the name of John Q. Jefferson. He was in the civics, and he was a personality in Savannah. He was a part of an insurance company group, and also he was an officer in the Black Referee Association. And also in that same house, after Jefferson moved out, he moved to California. One of our well-known coaches in Savannah by the name of Coach Joe Turner. He was a coach at Tompkins High School. He also stayed at Yamacraw at one time. And also there's a lot of permanent people, like for instance, our first Superior Court judge, Judge Gaston. He was the manager at Yamacraw rent office at one time, and he also was my neighbor. So when I was staying at 312, he lived at 410, which was right in the back of me. And before he went off to college to be a lawyer, that was his job as the manager of the rent office. And when he got back from school being a lawyer, he became the first black Superior Court judge in Savannah. And he was a personal friend of me and my family. Of course, we, like I say, we were one of the first to move in, and so we've known him from that time on. And him and my uncle got to be the best of friends, because Judge Gaston liked to shoot pool, and my uncle liked to shoot pool, so they would meet down at Swint Pool Hall on West Broad Street in the afternoon after work and after court. And I, as a young kid, I would sit back and watch him shoot pool. And I like to see my uncle and Judge Gaston shoot pool. But then at that time he was attorney, then he became a judge.
Okay.
And also they had some other prominent people stayed in Yamacraw at one time. President of Savannah State College, Prince Jackson, also lived in Yamacraw Village at one time. And another person out there at Savannah State College, his name was Wilkerson Scott. He also stayed in Yamacraw Village at one time, and his wife was my 8th grade school teacher at College Street School. And we had quite a few school teachers lived in Yamacraw also at one time. and radio personalities, and also we had judges like right now we have a Superior Court Judge Morris. He's from Yamacraw. He's out of Yamacraw. Matter of fact, his mother just passed recently, and she was in my class at 58 Beach Ave. And also we have some other prominent people that lived in Yamacraw that became doctors. Like for instance, we have a doctor that lived on Bryant Street, and I'm trying to think his last name. His brother, we call him Coach. His doctor, he retired, moved back to Savannah, and there was a big controversy about him because he had owned a big yacht, and he took his yacht over there to Sea Pine Plantation, and they won't let him dock his yacht there at the plantation there in Sea Pine, at the arena. Well, he was a young man that grew up right across the street from me in Yamacraw Village. And see, some other prominent people stayed in Yamacraw. Oh yeah, you have a lawyer, can't think of his name right now. He also, man, quite a few prominent people in Yamacraw. Doctors, lawyers, you name it, yeah, right there, out of Yamacraw. Yeah.
You've named a few businesses. Were there growing up, any businesses within Yamacraw? Or just around the periphery?
Well, no, only businesses in Yamacraw would be around the perimeters, like for instance, little convection areas, you know? Like for instance, right on the corner of Han and Bryant Street, you had Yank Market. Now it's an animal hospital. And the reason why I mentioned Yank Market, because when I was about, I must have been about 15 years old, 14 years old, I was in Yank one day, because he knew me from a little baby. I went over there and take my little 5 cents over there, ever since I was like 5, 6 years old. So one day he asked me, he said, go over there and ask your mama, can you work for me? So I ran back home and said, hey, mama, Yank said, can I work for him? So I was working there after school, on weekends. That was my first job, unsolicited, at Yank Market. So we had quite a few young men from around the area that worked at Yank Market.
What did children do for fun in Yamacraw?
Well, like I said, down in the playground area, that's between Farm and West Boundary Street, right behind the rent office, we had this Centennial Light Park, water split out the ground, and they have called the Centennial Park in Atlanta. They have one here in the market area now, but we had that since 1941. So like the Century Heat, the solar system, we had that since 1941. But growing up in Yamacraw, we had the auditorium there, and on weekends we would go up there and see movies. Then they have talent shows, and sometimes we have like teen dances there at the auditorium. And also we had a playground supervisor. Her name was Mrs. Vesta was her name. And her son, he became an NBA basketball player, Mervyn Jackson. Her name was Jackson also. And her son became an NBA basketball star. And she was over the kids' playground area. She could bring out all the balls and different things that we play with. Because they had a big closet, like she had the key to it. She would bring it out every day and take it back in. So that was a lot of fun, like little games we played, around there at that time. So growing up was real fun to me back in the day.
Before your parents moved into Yamacraw Village, where did they live?
Okay, they stayed, my mother stayed on right off of Florence Street. It was Florence near Klein Street, in one of those wooden shacks. And my father, he was living with his sister on York Street, which is in Yamacraw. And my mother was telling me my father at the time, he was the only young black man right around here. He had his own T-model Ford, one that had the jump seat in the back. And she said he was real popular with all the girls because he wasn't too many had that car, period. And he had one of those T-model Ford with the jump seat in it. And when she became pregnant with me, that's when he decided maybe back time for him to go to the service. And he went to the service, and they would make contact, and she would go down there where he would stay. He would stay somewhere out in Florida, and she would go out on the weekend and spend time with him, until he got out of service. When he went to Tuskegee for 4 years, then he came home after that.
So around Yamacraw, what are some of the surrounding neighborhoods? What are they called?
Well, we got Frogtown right here where we at now.
Okay, so that's to the south.
Right.
And then what's to the west?
Well, see, on to the north of Yamacraw, that was also Yamacraw. We call it the north end. See, and the project was Yamacraw. Then you had Frogtown on the south end. Then across the valley, you had West Savannah.
West Savannah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. What are let's see. What are just some of your favorite memories of the 25 years you spent in Yamacraw?
Well, some of my favorite members, we had a member of my church, Mrs. Toomer. Her husband was the founder of Carver Bank, you know, first black bank in Savannah. And I remember when she first came to Savannah because she stayed 317 with some neighbors of mine when she first came in, I think from Savannah. And she lived with these people and she wore a white uniform to work every day. And we used to reminisce about that from time to time before she passed. And I remember when she first came to town, and eventually she met Mr. Two when they became married. But I remember her when she first came to Savannah. And that's one of the fun days, some of the memories, you know.
Memories.
Yeah.
How do you think Yamacraw Village has changed since you lived there?
Well, Yamacraw made a big change. Because see, right now I get a chance to see Yamacraw still often because I'm a deacon at First Baptist Church, which is the centerpiece of Yamacraw right now. And so we had a walk through Yamacraw here about 4 or 5 weeks ago, where Savannah Police Department and the deacons and deacons of other churches in the community, we all came to Yamacraw on a Friday. We passed out hand leaflets letting the community know that the church is here for you, and we have different programs. For instance, we have Bible study, and we have things for kids, and we just did a kids cafe. That's something we do every summer. And the young lady that you interviewed, George Benton, she started that. She was over that. And we also have another group of young men called the Royal Ambassadors. They're young men. They go out in the community and try to pass on to other young men the value, you know, I'm doing the right thing, I'm becoming a Christian. And they do a lot of, and I also was the advisor of the Royal Ambassadors, but she's the founder of the Royal Ambassadors. And back then in Yamacraw, we had, say, team sports. Like for instance, we had a group called the Royal Hunters. It was just a bunch of young men from Yamacraw. You know, they got together and just made a little organization. You know, we bought T-shirts, you know, the Royal Hunters, and then we would play different segments of the city. Like we would play the East Side, or the West Side, or play the Frogtown group, and that was a lot of fun back then. But they don't do any of that no more.
You said it was the Royal
Hunters, like the bee Hunters.
Huh. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we had fun playing different sections of the city. They would come play us, and then sometimes we go play them.
Okay, I think that covers my questions. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to make sure was known?
No more that when I look back on Yamacraw, like I said, the first 25 years of my life, because after I did the sit-ins and the demonstrations.
Yeah, I did want to ask you that. Like, so you mentioned working with both Hosea Williams and W.W. Law.
Yeah, what happened is at that time, I was attending my father's church, which was St. Philip A.M.E. on West Broad Street, and still is today. And they were starting these Sunday afternoon mass meetings, and I don't know if St. Philip was the first church or not, but I know we used to have quite a few of them at St. Philip because the way its location is the central location. And they also had this voters drive, you know, you register to vote. And for some reason I was just 18 and I was interested in that. because my class, my teacher instilled in me that it was important that we vote. So I think we did a class thing. The whole class went down there and arrested at the courthouse. Then another thing, Mr. McLean was my teacher, 12th grade teacher, and he taught each class of his how to do an income tax return. That's one thing I appreciate about him, because that's what he did to make a little extra money during income tax season. He did income tax. So he made sure every senior class of his knew how to do an income tax. So to make a long story short, the first time I had to do an income tax return, I did it myself. And I just retired 10 years ago from Norfolk Southern Railroad, and I did my taxes every year until I retired from the railroad. Then that's when I decided I'd let someone else do it. But I've done it all myself.
Life skills.
Because of him, because before I became the railroad, I was working at Grumman Aircraft. When they first came to Savannah, they would send us to Savannah Vocational School to learn us how to build an airplane, be a riveter. We have the airplanes put together by rivets. And when you apply a rivet, you need two people. You have to have a person outside with your rivet gun. Then you need a fellow inside with a little bar. So when you put the rivet in there, I'm holding the bar, and you give it a couple of blasts, and the tip of the rivet will swell up, and that's how you put a plane together, by rivets. And the outside, you gotta be flush, smooth. And that was very interesting, doing that. So I would probably been in Grumman until I retired, but they had a big layoff. I was a part of that first big layoff. And that's how I had to go search for a job. That's how I got to the fire department. After leaving Grumman, I got to the fire department because of the layoff. And the fire department, to me, was the best job I ever had, because you only work 10 days a month, because you're 24 on, 48 off. I said, you can't beat this, until I had some friends working at the railroad. I was looking at their check versus my check. They were making 3 times the money I was making. So that's when I got interested in the railroad. So I got lucky, because I was trying to get on that CSX, and every time I go there, they have so many people there. You couldn't fit them all into one little room. So I wasn't successful. So one day I was reading the paper, and Norfolk Southern had an ad saying this was going to be at the hotel in the conference room. And I said, well, I'm going to go try this. And I got lucky, because they had about at least 200 or 300 people there that day. They only hired 8 people. And I had to be one of 8. So I got hired at the railroad in 1978. And I stayed there for 32 years. That was the best thing happened to me, I think, going to the railroad.
So the city has the W.W. Law collection, the papers he left behind in his house. So I'm just curious if there's anything you want to say about working with Mr. Law.
Okay, I'll tell you one thing about, like I said, I met W.W. Law when I was a little boy. I didn't know who he was, because he was...
You went to the same church, right?
No. So I was a little boy then. I wasn't a member of First Brian.
Okay.
I was going to my mother's church. No, I wasn't going to St. Philip. I started off going with my mother.
Okay.
So my mother took us to church. My mother went to Holderness Church on West Boundary Street, right in Yamacraw. And the pastor that came, first it was just a tent. My grandmother was the founder. My grandma was a licensed missionary. So she would help the founder of this tent, her and Deacon Brown. So they called the bishop, which is in Memphis, Tennessee, and told him that they had a tent going and had a few people congregating around, and they needed a minister. And they sent Solomon, and that's how it became Solomon Temple. Right now it's on Augusta Avenue, and they call it Solomon Temple. But it began right there on West Boundary Street at the Cornell, right there, when you get ready to go with the viaduct now, it's right to the left there. And that's the area where they have the visitors. You get a Charlie. Well, right there was a tent, and they made a block concrete building there, and they had church there for a while. So they got ready to build that first Tapman's Bridge. They got ready to build Tapman's Bridge. Well, they had to buy all that property there, and that's when the tent moved to Gwinnett Street at the Masonic Temple. Masonic Temple was right there on the corner of Gwinnett and I want to say College Street. then they got ready to build that project, they had to tear the temple down. And that's when Solomon Temple went from there to Augusta Avenue where it sits today. But my grandmother was the one instrument in that becoming Solomon Temple, because she's the one sent for a pastor and they sent Solomon.
All right. Anything you want to share?
Okay, getting back to Jose Williams and WW Law. Like I said, I didn't know who WW Law was until I started going on Broughton Street, and I would see he was in a uniform.
Right.
He was a postman.
Yeah.
And that's when I found he was a postman. Then we got to be friends over the years, because he remembered me, see me as a little boy, waving at me on Sundays going to church. And eventually one day we was talking, and he said, I'm gonna hold classes at a building there on West Broad Street. Any young man that was interested in being a postman, he was gonna teach the class. And I was one of the members that was interested. So he had about 6 of us, and he would teach us the class on how to become a postman. He did that. And I passed, took the test at the post office, and I passed the test. But what happened in the meantime, the railroad thing came about. So I said, well, let me try that. So I ended up going to the railroad. The post office eventually called me, but I was already at the railroad then. So I had to make a decision. I'm gonna stay at the railroad, or I'm gonna go to the post office. Mm-hmm. So I made, I think, a good decision. I stayed with the railroad.
32 years.
Yeah, I stayed with the railroad.
Good. All right. Well, I think I'm good. I appreciate you sitting down with me and talking today. It's been a lot of good information. So thank you for sharing your memories of Yamacraw with me.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it.